Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 794, and today is May 5th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. A lot to talk about today, so I'm going to jump right into it. Just want to give people a heads up that I have some big interviews coming up on the Kyle Anzalone show. So if you want to subscribe, it's the first link in the show notes page. Go to the YouTube channel and subscribe. Even if you don't usually watch on YouTube, just subscribe to the YouTube channel. It will help us in the algorithm, help us to grow that show a little bit faster. And I got some big guests coming on that I want to have a good size audience for. And so Misty Winston, who of course we're old friends and have been interviewing each other for years now, it's been almost a year since we talked. And so I'm having her on the Kyle Anzalone show. And then returning to the Kyle Anzalone show the following week will be Dan McAdams and Kelly Vallejo. So I'm really excited for the lineup that we have coming up there over the next couple of weeks. So be sure you subscribe to the Kyle Anzalone show, and we'll get right into it on conflicts of interest. First up here, this one from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Trump proposes $1.01 trillion military budget for 2026. So the White House released a budget plan on Friday proposing a $1 trillion in military spending for 2026, a 13% increase from this year. The proposal fulfills Trump's vow to bring the official U.S. military budget over $1 trillion for the first time. The increase in spending will include funding for the President Trump's plan for a major missile defense system for the U.S., which he has dubbed the Iron Dome for America, which will likely kick off a new global arms race. Despite the massive increase, Trump is facing pushback from some Republican hawks who are complaining that the White House is relying on the reconciliation bill for some of the funds. According to Senator Roger Wickers, a Republican from Mississippi and the chairman from the Armed Services Committee, the White House is asking Congress for $892.6 billion, that's billion with a B, in military spending for the fiscal year 2026, which is about the same as the 2025 budget. The remaining $119 billion will be authorized under a budget bill that Congress is currently working on. The budget bill will include $150 billion in military spending that can be spent over the next 4 years, but under the White House proposal, it will mostly be spent in 2026. Senator Mitch McConnell complained in a statement that the administration wasn't asking Congress to appropriate the entire $101 trillion. He said, "It is peculiar how much the president's advisors spent talking about restoring peace through strength, given how apparently unwilling they've been to invest accordingly in national defense or in other critical infrastructure of national power. Make no mistake, a one-time influx reconciliation spending is not a substitute for a full year appropriations." And so they're complaining that this $1 trillion in military spending, this extra $150 billion, is just not enough. It has to be more, and it has to be funded annually. So McConnell went on to say that fortunately, presidential budget requests are just that, requests. Congress will still have the opportunity to ensure American power and credibility over our commitments are fully resourced. The U.S. has never officially spent $1 trillion on the military budget, but the actual cost of U.S. military spending has exceeded $1 trillion for years. According to veteran analyst Winslow Wheeler, based on the $895 billion NDAA, that's the National Defense Authorization Act, the official bill that Congress passes every year to fund the military, that's the official number, but U.S. additional spending for 2025 was expected to reach $1.77 trillion. And so Wheeler explains that when we talk about the defense budget, we're talking about the Pentagon and a limited part of the Energy Department's budget that is spent on nuclear weapons. But what should really be counted is things like the Department of Veteran Affairs, and then also the CIA and other national security agencies, the interest on the debt that's been accumulated because of our past wars, and none of that is counted in the official number. So I'm sure this first official $1 trillion budget is actually closer to the first official $2 trillion budget. Next up here, this one I wrote on May 4th for the Libertarian Institute. Trump says he may walk away from Ukraine-Russia talks. So President Donald Trump said at some point his administration may give up on attempting to bring about an end to the war in Ukraine. In an interview on Meet the Press with host Kristen Welker, she asked the president how close Ukraine and Russia are to coming to an agreement. Trump said, "I do believe we're closer with one party and maybe not as close with the other, but we'll have to see. 5,000 soldiers a week on average are dying. They're not American soldiers, but I want to solve the problem." Trump refused to say which country was the greater barrier to reaching an agreement to end the war. Welker pressed Trump to explain when he would give up on trying to end the war. And so this, it is always very telling when you have the Sunday news shows and what the hosts want to talk about and what they want to ask their interviewees about, right? And so as much as Trump has interesting things to say, and in a sense, Trump always gets to say what he wants to say, because he'll just go off on a tangent and say completely unrelated things and just go on and on and on, right? But at the same time, the questions that the hosts are asking him, I think, reveals what the establishment agenda is. And so she's saying, but isn't there a red line? Isn't there a date where you're not going to be willing to engage in these talks? And I think if Trump were to say this publicly, this gives Ukraine and Russia too knowledge of when the U.S. may decide to end its involvement. And there's two ways that this could go. And Trump didn't say which of those ways it was. So what Trump did say is, well, there will be a time when I say, okay, keep going, keep being stupid. He's saying keep the war going, keep being stupid, fighting the war, and maybe a deal. He said maybe it's not possible to do, but what he meant is maybe a deal is not possible. Even I, the greatest deal maker in the world, can't get this deal done. The president did not put a firm date on when he would consider making a deal was no longer possible. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said that would come within weeks. And so what Trump and Rubio aren't saying, which is very interesting and very important, is what does it mean when the U.S. says we're going to walk away from trying to make a deal? Does it mean that we're just saying we're done with this war altogether? The proxy war is off. We're not sending any more arms, no more intelligence, no more government funding the Ukrainian government. We're done with all of it. We are washing our hands of this entire process. Or, and I think it's really possible that this is what Trump is really saying, or we are done with negotiations, but we're keeping the rest of it in pace. And so I don't think he's going to necessarily take the same path as Biden and just give Ukraine, another $60-70 billion in weapons over the next 2 years. I think it's far more likely going to be finding loans, finding money from the Ukrainians, maybe Europeans giving the Ukrainians money to buy American weapons, and that it's going to be at least framed as purchasing, maybe even purchases that Ukraine is agreeing to pay back effectively loans, right? Ukraine's going to pay back the U.S. for these loans, for these weapons at a future date, but I think it's very possible that Trump effectively continues the proxy war, just either with getting paid for the weapons or getting agreed to get paid for the weapons in the future. So one of the reasons I think that is Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who's a real hawk. He's been real giddy about this war from the beginning, has really only changed his tune about it since joining the Trump administration. Rubio is really trying to drive a hard point home on the fact that this isn't going to get, that if it that we're not going to go on with these negotiations forever, and at some point there's an end date for them. I think the negotiating ending is going to benefit Ukraine if we're going to keep the proxy war going and just end our involvement as the mediator. Then Marco Rubio is going to try to bring these talks to an end as fast as possible. I think if what's happening here is that the talks, once they end, the U.S. is going to pull the plug on U.S. support for Ukraine as well, then Marco Rubio would not be so interested in having these talks come to an end and would be saying, oh, it could take months and months and months to reach a deal. So during the interview, Trump touted the mineral agreement signed between Washington and Kiev last week. He said the deal would help recruit some U.S. money of that the Joe Biden spent in aid, sending aid to Ukraine. So according to the text of the agreement, once he goes into effect, the U.S. deliveries a new military assistance to the government Ukraine in any form, including the donation of weapons, ammunition, technology, or training. The capital contribution of U.S. partners will be deemed to be increased by the assessed value of the military assistance. And so essentially, let's say they open up a new venture for some kind of rare earth mine or some kind of natural gas sale, right? Well, the U.S. will get a share in that venture, a share of those profits based on the weapons that we're sending to the Ukraine. So this really suggests that the U.S. would continue the proxy war under this mineral deal. So Welker and Trump did not discuss what walking away from talks would mean for U.S. support. And isn't that interesting that she wouldn't even bother to ask him that question? Because it seems to me that that's the most important question that she could have asked him. So the president said one barrier to a deal was the hatred between Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Ukrainian President Zelensky, along with each country's military leadership. And then we had this interesting statement from Vice President J.D. Vance last week that I included in my article. He said, "It's going to be up to the Russians and Ukrainians now that each side knows what each other's terms of peace are. It's going to be up to them to come to an agreement and stop this brutal conflict. It's not going anywhere. It's not going to end anytime soon." And, I think Vance is a real believer and would really like to end this conflict. And so him saying that has me a little bit concerned here. All right, next up, Israeli strikes kill 110 in Gaza over 3 days as children starve under the blockade. So Israeli airstrikes on Gaza killed 110 Palestinians and wounded over 400 over the past 3 days, according to death toll updates by the Gaza Health Ministry, and children are reported to be starved to death under the U.S.-Israeli blockade. In the same 3-day period, 7 bodies of Palestinians previously killed by Israeli attacks were recovered from the rubble. The health ministry's numbers only account for the dead and wounded Palestinians brought to the hospitals and morgues. Israeli attacks over the weekend included the bombing of a house in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. According to rescue workers, the strike killed 8 people, including a month-old baby, a 1-year-old girl, and a 1-year-old boy. Israeli strikes on Sunday included attacks on camps in the Al-Mawasi, killing at least 10 people, according to Al Jazeera. Clashes were reported in southern Gaza on Sunday as Hamas's armed wing, the Al-Qassams Brigade, claimed its fighters killed IDF soldiers in an ambush near Rafah. Later in the day, the IDF confirmed 2 of its soldiers were killed in booby-trapped tunnels under Rafah. On Saturday, Al Jazeera reported that a baby girl named Wana Salah al-Safkai died of malnutrition and dehydration at a hospital near Gaza City, as the Israeli military has blocked all goods from entering Gaza for more than 2 months. According to Gaza's government media office, 57 Palestinians have starved to death in Gaza, the majority of them being children. The UN's World Food Program and the UN Palestinian Relief Agency have both said repeatedly that there are they have thousands, not hundreds of thousands, just thousands of trucks ready to enter Gaza and bring much needed relief, but the blockade remains. Axios reported on Friday that the U.S. and Israel were close to an agreement that would allow aid to enter Gaza without it being controlled by Hamas, but there is no sign that the aid will be allowed to enter anytime soon, and it's unclear if the plan would be sufficient enough to bring real relief to the Palestinians who are currently living under constant bombardment, as well as the starvation campaign. Gaza's health ministry also said on Sunday that since Israel resumed its genocidal war on March 18th, which it did with full U.S. support, it has recorded the deaths of 2,436 Palestinians and nearly 6,500 injuries. Since October 7, 2023, the ministry's death toll has reached 52,535, and their number of wounded has climbed to 118,491. All right, next up here, this one from our friend Will Porter at antiwar.com. On May 2nd, Israel bombs humanitarian aid flotilla on its way to Gaza. A ship carrying supplies bound for Gaza was attacked by Israeli drones in international waters on Friday, according to the activist group that organized the flotilla. The vessel reportedly took at least one direct hit to its hull and sustained damage from a fire, forcing its crews to issue an urgent call for help. Organizers with the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, FFC, said one of their vessels was attacked by an unidentified drone in the early hours of Friday morning, noting that the ship was not far off the coast of Malta when it was hit. So, the press release from the group said, at 00:23 Maltese time, the Conscious, a Freedom Flotilla Coalition ship, came under direct attack in international waters. Armed drones attacked the front of an unarmed civilian vessel twice, causing a fire and substantial breach of the hull. The drone strikes appear to have deliberately targeted the ship's generator, leaving the crew without power and placing the vessel at great risk of sinking. An FFC spokesman, Carolyn Butterfly, later told Reuters that the ship was struck en route to Malta, where it was scheduled to pick up other activists, among them climate campaigner Gerda Thunberg and retired U.S. Army Colonel Mary Ann Wright. And of course, Ann Wright is, a really great activist, and we've run a lot of her stuff over at Anti-War over the years. The group said it had arranged the aid shipments under media blackout to avoid any potential sabotage. The FFC also shared footage which allegedly showed the aftermath of the strike, with smoke and flames seen on the ship. At one point in the brief video, an apparent explosion can be heard. In the second press release, the groups later shared a photo of the damage sustained in the strike. Maltese authorities say they received a SOS from a vessel in international waters soon after midnight local time, adding that a nearby tugboat assisted the ship, according to Reuters. Officials added that the crew of the Conscious declined to board the tugboat, and also confirmed to CNN that the fire on the ship had been extinguished. No casualties were reported in the attack. The FFC press release said that the Israeli ambassadors must be summoned to answer for violations of international law, including the ongoing blockade of Gaza and the bombing of our civilian vessel in international waters. In a social media post on Friday, the United Nations Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese, said she received a very distressed call from people on the Freedom Flotilla that is carrying essential food and medicine to the starving Gaza population. She explained, I call on concerned state authorities, including maritime authorities, to support the ship and its crew as needed. I trust the competent authorities will also ascertain the facts and intervene appropriately. The Israeli military is yet to comment on the incident, but has said it is looking into reports about the attack, according to the BBC. Israel's foreign ministry did not immediately respond to a request for comment by Reuters. The FFC mission aimed to bring supplies to Gaza some 2 months into a heightened blockade by Tel Aviv, whose forces have leveled much of the territory in air and ground operations in response to Hamas's October 7, 2023 attack on Israel. On Friday, the International Committee for the Red Cross said aid operations in Gaza were on the verge of total collapse thanks to the blockade. In 2010, a similar humanitarian aid flotilla organized by the Free Gaza Movement and the Foundation for Human Rights and Humanitarian Relief, a Turkish org, was attacked by Israeli forces in international water. 9 people were killed in the assault, with another activist dying of their injuries, and dozens more were wounded. A UN report later found that all 10 activists had sustained gunshot wounds, and added that the circumstances of the killing of at least 6 passengers were in a manner consistent with extralegal, arbitrary, and summary execution. So just outright murder. And that's why it's no surprise that Israel did it again. All right, next up here, this one from Dave DeCamp. State Department approves $3.5 billion missile sale to Saudi Arabia. And this is just going down the wrong road when it comes to U.S. involvement in the Middle East. We need to be removing ourselves from the situation there, and this is going to further embroil the U.S. Now, I think this is another sign that Trump is the same Trump as in his first administration, where weapon sales are largely going to guide him. And I think this is going to have an impact, particularly on his policy when it comes not only to the Middle East, but the war in Ukraine. As we talked about earlier, it may be through this mineral deal that Ukraine suddenly has some billions of dollars to work with. Now, let's say they're not actually producing these rare earth minerals, but they're just, I don't know, even creating faux companies and things like that, and pretending that they're developing these companies and these mining sites and things like that. And what the U.S. is doing is receiving a share control of those mining operations that maybe don't really have a whole lot of actual value. They're never actually going to produce rare earths. But let's say the Ukrainians value that at a couple $1 billion, they give the Americans half ownership of it, and suddenly the Ukrainians have $1 billion worth of funds to buy weapons with. Of course, this is all fake money, but this is really the kind of thing that I could see happening with the mineral deal. And again, I think this story shows that Trump, his top priority is making good deals as he sees, and oftentimes that means selling weapons to places where it entangles the U.S. in deeper conflicts. All right, moving along here, more bad news for those of us who hope that Trump would really be American first and really hold up that American first mantle as dismantling the overseas American empire and starting to bring things home and ending wars. Trump says he wants total dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program. So President Trump said in an interview that aired on Sunday that he wants the total dismantlement of Iran's civilian nuclear program, a condition that's a non-starter for Tehran. Total dismantlement. Yes, that's all I would accept, Trump told NBC's Meet the Press. Trump suggested that he might be open to allowing Iran to maintain civilian nuclear program to produce energy, but sounded skeptical of the idea. He explained, there's a new theory going out there that Iran would be allowed to have civilian, meaning make electricity, but I say they have so much oil, what do they need it for? Trump was asked about Secretary of State Marco Rubio's recent suggestion that Iran could maintain a civilian nuclear program. He explained, people are talking about that, and this is something that's really pretty new in the dialogue. My inclination is to say, what do you need that for? You have a lot of oil. And so you gotta love Trump's almost childlike understanding of foreign policy at times. I mean, it's absolutely horrific. It's going to get the U.S. in wars, but it's just, you think there's maybe something more complex there, but I think he really does understand a lot of these things. And this very baseline simplicity, like selling weapons is good for America. We're bringing in money if we're selling weapons abroad. And so when we sell weapons to Ukraine or Saudi Arabia, it benefits the United States of America. Same way here. Iran has oil, Iran has gas. What do they need nuclear programs for? He doesn't even think about, this country is thinking long-term divesting as there's less reliance and demand on oil. So Trump, going on here, when asked if he would only accept full dismantlement, the president said he would be open to hearing about Iran maintaining a civilian nuclear program, but added that could lead to military. Rubio's idea of Iranian civilian nuclear program would involve prohibiting Iran's ability to enrich its own uranium and rely on imported uranium. Another condition Iran has said is non-negotiable. And so this is, one of the interesting things, right, that we have seen, and I think somewhat on the war in Ukraine, but definitely like when it comes to Israel, when it comes to Iran, where there's maybe some serious ongoing debate in the administration on what position to take, the hawkish position or the ultra hawkish position. And, neither the Rubio position, the Trump position are both non-starters. So in a sense, it really doesn't matter which path they go down. But it is different, interesting that they split there. So in making his argument, Rubio falsely claimed that there are non-nuclear armed states with civilian programs that enrich. There are no nuclear armed states, non-nuclear armed states with civilian nuclear programs that enrich uranium. Of course, these are countries with latent nuclear programs is what they call them. So Japan, Brazil, Germany, I believe South Korea as well, all have these style of nuclear programs. So the Iranian foreign minister explained Tehran's position on X. As a founding signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, Iran has every right to possess the full nuclear fuel cycle. Moreover, there are several NPT members that enrich uranium while wholly rejecting nuclear weapons, adding that maximalist position and incendiary rhetoric achieve nothing except eroding the chances of success. His comments came after Rubio again demanded that Iran walk away from nuclear enrichment. So I've never thought Trump was going to get a nuclear deal done with Iran. I think the threat here is that he's now looking for a nuclear deal and is threatening military if one doesn't get done. So if no deal gets done, then we're going to attack Iran. I think the best that we could hope for under the Trump administration is essentially what we got under the Biden administration, is that the conflict remains frozen. We don't move anywhere near getting a deal done, but we don't have enough provocations to push Iran into making a nuclear bomb. All right, two stories from here over the weekend from Syria by Jason Ditz. Turkish jets interfere with Israeli warplanes attacking Syria, and Israel launches airstrikes near Syria's presidential palace. And so it seems some of the sectarian violence in Syria has shifted away from the Alawites, which were the sect of the former Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad, and kind of in the coastal regions of Syria. These are where the Russian military bases are. And when the leader of the now Syrian government, Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, or as he now goes by, Ahmed al-Shara, and his band of jihadist thugs, which were one point Tahrir al-Sham, just now the Syrian government, carried out some ethnic cleansing, killed at least a few thousand through execution, Alawites in the coastal areas. Israel and the international community really didn't make too big of a deal out of that. Now that the sectarian violence has moved towards the Druze community in Damascus and in the surrounding area, it seems Israel is far more interested in that. My guess is this is about Israel being far more interested in the territory around Damascus versus the coastal region of Syria, and that's why Israel stepped up these airstrikes. I think the interesting note here was that Turkey interfered and tried to, I think, draw something of a red line around what Israel was doing in Syria. I will be interested to see how or if Trump mediates this issue, because Turkey is a NATO ally and Israel is, according to the Washington consensus, America's most important ally. And since NATO is the most important alliance, this creates a real kind of conflict that is going to be interesting to see how the U.S. walks the line there. All right, last up here, Yemeni missile strikes Israel's Ben Gurion airport. So, a missile fired from Yemen struck an access road on the grounds of Israel's Ben Gurion airport on Sunday, as heavy U.S. bombing campaign has failed to deter Yemen's Houthis, who are officially known as Ansar Allah. According to the Times of Israel, the Israeli military tried multiple times to intercept the missile, but it failed. This is interesting. A U.S. Thermal High Altitude Area Defense, or a THAAD system, that's deployed to Israel also failed to intercept the Yemeni missile. The missile left a crater, and 6 people were injured in the attack, although none of them were seriously hurt. And I believe a couple of those injuries were more from people trying to flee the attack, tripping over each other, stampeding, falling, things like that, versus actually being hit by debris. And then if you looked at the attack, I am kind of skeptical that this missile even had a warhead on it. It doesn't look like a very big explosion. It was reported to be a hypersonic missile, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was, based on its ability to evade the air defense systems. And so it's possible that this was just like a kinetic missile. Now, maybe it was supposed to have a warhead and that didn't work. Maybe the warhead was somehow damaged in one of the attempts to intercept it. or again, it just didn't have a warhead and it's just a kinetic missile strike. Either way, it's a pretty big statement from Ansar Allah that they can bypass the Israeli missile defense system. I have no idea what Israel is going to do in response here, what the U.S. is going to do in response here, but I do think it's going to be a major response, and I am very concerned for the people of Yemen that they are about to suffer a really tremendous price because of this strike. Not to say that the Ansar Allah is wrong to stand up for the people of Gaza. I think that's for the people of Yemen to decide if they want to be involved in how they view the Palestinians and if it is worth coming to their defense. I certainly don't think the Americans have any, are certainly in the wrong to punish the Yemenis for standing up for the Palestinians. But just that, that punishment is going to come nonetheless. And feel bad for the people of Yemen and what the Israelis and the Americans are likely going to do to their country this week. All right, I am going to wrap up the show there. Remember, subscribe to the Kyle Anzalone Show. Big interviews coming up. Misty Winston, Kelly Blahos, and Daniel McAdams.